Welcome to the Sharing the Faith podcast, where every other week we explore the beauty and power of faith in Jesus Christ, the light of the world. Now here is your host, Dr. Tom Neal.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Tom Neal for another edition of Sharing the Faith. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is, of course, a production of the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. And as I normally try to do, I have a wonderful guest today that I've invited from Des Moines, Iowa, whom I've known for quite a number of years. And that is Adam Storey. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Adam is here today to talk about a topic I've never talked about in this podcast before, and that is canon law. So we're excited to dive into this. The word excited and canon law normally don't go together, but Adam puts them together. And so you'll see today why canon law is so important in the life of a faithful Catholic. So I'm going to just give a little intro to Adam here, first of all, to let you know a little bit about his background. So Adam's life has been described by some people as statistically improbable. He was a child prodigy. Adam performed Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 at the age of 8 before graduating from the Juilliard at age 18. Seeking a greater challenge, he acquired a forged Swiss identity, enlisted in the Pontifical Swiss Guard in 2004, and served undetected for several months. It was there, while guarding St. John Paul II at the Apostolic Palace, that he experienced a profound conversion to the Catholic faith and discerned a vocation not to the priesthood, but to canon law. When his carefully constructed identity eventually unraveled, Adam dedicated himself to earning a licentiate in canon law so that he could personally defend himself in the canonical proceedings that followed. The trial is remembered by canonists as the first in history in which the respondent successfully objected to his own objections. Following an undisclosed settlement with several governments and at least one ecclesiastical tribunal, Adam entered into a federal witness protection program. Adam Storey remains his alias, and his true identity is known only to very few. Adam, are you okay?
I put in there that I was on 7th grade honor roll, and you didn't mention that, so I'm a little bit upset.
I don't have enough time on this podcast for all of your life story, so I just thought I'd tell the part that was
all right.
That was,
but I do, listeners, I was on honor roll too, so
that's okay. There's a lot more about Adam that is much more interesting than that, but I thought that I didn't want to distract from the topic today. Well, let me kind of finish actually. So in this current chapter of his life, Adam serves as the Vice Chancellor of Canonical Affairs for the Diocese of Des Moines, having earned his JCL, which is what is it?
Juris Canonici Licentiate.
Okay, so licentiate in canon law. In 2025, before entering canon law, he directed the Diocese of Des Moines Marriage and Family Life Office for 13 years. He's been married for 15 years, the father of 5 children, Gabriel, Cecilia, Gemma, Zita, Marigold, and Louisa. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Beautiful children.
Yeah.
You have. And his wife, Kara. Been married 15 years, and he still enthusiastically encourages everyone to visit Iowa's famous life-size butter cow at the state fair each year in August. It is something too. We lived up there, of course, for a while, and that was one of the highlights of all my 4 years there was that.
Yeah, you can't unsee it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it.
No, you can't. And once you start looking at it, someone has to pull you away.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
You can't stop.
It has a bit of a gravitational pull to it. That
it does.
It draws you in, yeah.
It's really amazing. It's incredible. So Pope John Paul II once referred to theology of the body as a ticking time bomb in theological anthropology, or the understanding of the human person. Portions of Adam's licentiate thesis have now been reportedly read by at least 4 people. And I almost read it, but that would be 4 plus almost. But you decide who is the greater impactor of history, John Paul II. So I'm so excited to have you here. The rest of this show, anyone who's still watching at this point, it will now turn much more serious. So I want to talk about your elements of your thesis, which was seriously, it was a beautiful, powerful, and I think compelling argument about the role, particularly of the laity, in the life of the church, and in her life in terms of the church's governance. And in there, let me just jump in to talk about, you talk in your thesis about the radical equality that baptism grants to all the faithful. That's kind of the ground and foundation. And you focus in the title of your thesis as well, on what's called the right to be heard, that's spelled out in the canons. So tell me about what the connection between those, the dignity of baptism that is given to all the faithful and this right to be heard. Just give us a little context.
Yeah, well, I think it's important to recognize that canon law is really, it's an ecclesiology. It's an expression of who we understand the church to be. And after the Second Vatican Council, we had the 1917 Code moving into the Second Vatican Council. And the update of the code was really meant to be a fruit of the council. Sometimes the 1983 Code is called the last document of the council. So Second Vatican II happens, the bishops get together, they say, we're going to do this revision of the church's law. And there were 10 principles that were proposed to kind of guide that revision. And principally what I wrote about is principle 6 and 7. But what that really was is it was taking out of the Second Vatican Council that recognition of our universal participation in the universal priesthood, our baptism, the dignity that comes with that. How is that going to be reflected in the church's law? This was a guiding principle in the revision process, and there was kind of ups and downs in that process, things that went well and that didn't. But it really plays out in kind of an attempt to recognize the rights of all Christians, an attempt to honor those rights. And part of that is to, there's an attempt to move past, there's the people who do the ministering and there's the people who receive ministry, people who do the work of Christ and people who receive the work of Christ. No, all of us as Christians are called to participate in that work. And a part of that is that hearing of people, that honoring them, that listening to them, that letting them participate in the decision-making processes of the church, it's a work in progress in the life of the church. But I think it was a really beautiful renewal that we were invited to.
It is. And so when you think about what the means for voicing, the laity kind of voicing their own perspective, vision, ideas, bringing their charisms, gifts to bear, what are the means in the church, the structures, the means that canon law envisions would be the primary ways that laity could have their voice heard appropriately by the those who are shepherding the church? Yeah,
well, one of the things that I think in my canonical studies that was drawn to the surface is that when you look at the life of a diocese or when you look at the life of a parish, a tremendous amount of the work that is done is administrative work. It's the kind of day-to-day, the not really exciting, but the ordinary decisions that have to be made in order for a community to function, in order for a community to be ordered and to move forward in a fruitful way. So in the revision process, there was a lot of focus on these administrative acts and what that looks like, how that plays out. And there's one generic canon that kind of my thesis was really focused on that talked about in certain types of administrative decisions, when someone's rights might be injured by that decision, insofar as possible, they must be heard. This was Canon 50. The revision process, it kind of began in the late 60s and the 70s, and there was a really expansive view of what that hearing would look like. There was a lot of procedural elements. There was a lot of steps in the process. Over time, that became pared down. I think in the late 70s into the early 80s, that became pared down. We end up with Canon 50, which is kind of a generic invitation for hearing. And what I would say is the church's law right now, we can do a really a effective job of listening to people. Like, that's within the realm of possibilities right now. Unfortunately, what we ended up with Canon 50, I don't think that hearing is required. It's possible, but it's not always required. And so it's kind of a mixed bag. How do we live this out? How do we implement the hearing that we're supposed to implement? But I mean, the fundamentals, most of the decisions that we make are administrative decisions. In those decisions, are we attentive to people? Are we honoring people? Are we paying attention to the people to whom these decisions have a real effect? And that's kind of, that was on the mind of those who were reforming the code, preparing for the 83 code, and something I tried to draw attention to in my thesis.
Excellent. So maybe could you put some flesh on this? Like, what would a case be, or a situation you imagine where there is a need or a right for a lay person or a laity to voice something where that functions in the way you're talking about there, according to the Canon 50 vision?
Yeah, well, so another thing my thesis drilled into is there's the generic hearing in Canon 50, but in certain important processes that the church recognizes as important, there's a much more rigorous hearing that happens. So the removal of a pastor has its own process, and that's the removing of a cleric from an office within the church, the office of pastor. There's consultation that's required. There's a presentation of evidence. There's the opportunity to refute evidence. There's all these steps that go into it. Well, there's also in the church, there's lay people who hold offices, the office of chancellor, the office of finance officer of a diocese, different offices in the life of a parish. And they might not technically be offices always, but there are lay people who hold offices. When they're removed from that office, if they're removed, really what we have is the protection of Canon 50, kind of a generic hearing that is supposed to happen insofar as possible. And what I would propose is we can look at the more rigorous hearing and apply those same principles. Nothing prevents us from applying those principles in other contexts.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So I get, and you can kind of take the conversation if I'm jumping ahead too far, but so this right to be heard. So you think about in a diocese, the bishop makes the decisions in the end. I mean, he's ultimately responsible for the governance of the diocese and the decisions that are made overall. So in what way is this hearing, you said, is it not required? It can be listened to. In what way is it not just, just a facade? In other words, it's not just a kind of they say they're listening, but they don't listen. In what sense are you arguing that it really doesn't, it isn't a facade? There's something real at work here.
Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Well, I would say the procedural safeguards that we have to recognize that these are a means to an end. They're tools that we use, and they're tools that we use in order to make sure that we're really respecting people's dignity, that we're honoring them, that we're protecting their rights. But there is a way where you can become procedurally focused, but then you miss kind of the meaning behind why do we have these procedures. And in all those different procedures, the way I always think of it is it's actually, there's a philosopher, Matthew Crawford, and he talks about jigging environments where you set up jigs to help you kind of do the right thing. The example that he uses is a line cook. A line cook will set up his station in order to kind of move through the process of cooking food effectively. And you set up an environment so that you're going to do the thing that you're trying to do in an excellent way. You prepare the environment, and then it helps you do that thing in an excellent way. And I think the procedural safeguards that we have in processes are about setting up the environment so that we can truly make sure that we hear people, that they have a chance to defend themselves, that we've protected their rights, and we set up that process to help make it easier for us to do the right thing, to do the excellent action. And the reason we need those jigs, what I would say the reason we need the jigs is at any parish, at any diocese, the amount of administrative work is overwhelming. There's so much to do, so many responsibilities, that when things get overlooked, it's not out of malice. It's not, most of the time, it's not out of malice or a authentic lack of respect for somebody. It's just trying to get something done. But when we make mistakes like that, it can really injure people. And that's the thing that I want to be attentive to, that we need to set ourselves up for success so that we can avoid those injuries.
Sure. So maybe for people who are listening who aren't familiar with how the juridical structures of the church work, for example, in a diocese where you go and where the process is, adjudicated, or how it's done from beginning at the parish level or elsewhere, what does that look like just in general? Yeah,
well, so the church envisions in her law that there can be trials actually to defend someone's rights. If someone's rights are violated, there can be a trial to address that. I would say those are exceedingly rare in the life of the church. What's more common in administrative decisions is you hear about this thing called administrative recourse, which is kind of taking it to the boss. Who made the decision? How do we go to the boss? How do we ask them to reconsider that decision? The place where we kind of hear about it publicly, like if you're in the life of the church, you usually hear about that with alterations of parishes, whether a parish has been merged, whether it's been suppressed, whether a church building is being relegated to profane use. Mm-hmm. When parish structures are altered, usually you hear about interventions where this is going to Rome, we're going to take this to Rome. That's hierarchical recourse. Conceivably, that recourse is available in a lot of other circumstances, but people tend to not know that that's a possibility, or tend to not know how to do that. And kind of a mantra among some canonists is for rights to be real, they must be defensible. And so the church talks a lot about rights. And in canon law, in Book 2, there's kind of a section that really articulates in a beautiful way the rights of the faithful. But for those to be real, they must be defensible. We need to be able to vindicate our rights in certain circumstances. And that's kind of a mixed bag in how it plays out.
That makes sense. And what would give us some examples of some of the rights it is a beautiful section, that the rights of the laity, and maybe some that people listening aren't aware that are spelled out for them.
Yeah. Well, the rights to participate in apostolic work, the rights to receive from the spiritual riches of the church, to receive being fed by the life of the church, the right and the duty to proclaim the gospel. And these are Christian rights, they're tied to our baptism, but there's also just human rights that we enjoy that are broader than that. You have human rights just by virtue of being a person. You have rights tied to our Christian identity. And then you can go into rights tied to particular states of life in the church, particular roles in the church, things like that. But there's kind of this layered reality that we participate in these rights in all these different ways as mm-hmm. Christians, as Catholics.
Yes. So the ars audiendi that you talk about, a lovely phrase, the art of listening. That's a beautiful part of your thesis, by the way. Talk about what about that to you is so important, because it really is. I think it's a striking idea.
Yeah. I think it's about. To me, it's kind of putting the first things first. And I dedicated the thesis to my wife and to my kids because I think that they're teaching the art of listening to me. And I just have this, visceral sense that if I want to be a good father, I have to listen to my kids. I have to know them. I have to know what's going on in their life. I have to know the concerns of their heart. And I'm certainly going to make decisions as a dad that they don't like. I'm going to make decisions that are going to be upsetting. I'm going to make decisions that are just wrong. But if I want to be a good father, I have to listen. And I think the life of the church, and anyone in any sense of leadership in the church, is the same way, that we have to listen to the people in our communities. We have to listen to all the faithful. We have to make their concerns our own, and we have to know that. We have to be responsive to that. We're going to make decisions that are bad, but I think if we're cultivating that art of listening, our work is going to flourish a lot more fully than it would otherwise.
Yes. And there's an article you shared with me about shared responsibility, and the author used the phrase shared irresponsibility in there as well. If you remember that, you shared that with me. And I thought that was very interesting, right? So the faithful have a right to shared responsibility within the church to bring their gifts and their charisms and so on, as well as, the rights to receive things from the church, but also the right to participate, as you said, fully in the life of the church and work, engage in the works of the church, the apostolate, and so on. But there's also the danger of shared irresponsibility. And just, you think about the times when the church screws up and then everyone jumps on the church for bad decisions. But then the author says, but there's an examination of conscience that has to happen there. So in what way, kind of maybe how canon law helps us to think about that there's not just rights, but there's a duty also involved in that.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think rights and duties are intimately tied together. And there is a way that I think there's an unhealthy way that if I'm not the one who's actually making the choice, I can kind of exempt myself from the responsibility of that choice, and the article talks about all the different ways people are involved in choices through their counsel, through helping with the execution of the decision, through accountability after a decision has been made, following it and measuring it after you've made that choice. And through the way that you gather and then the way that you present information to the person who's going to make the choice, right? And these are all profoundly significant. And we should take these very seriously, because a lot of times those other elements leading up to the choice are more influential than just pulling the lever to say, we're going to do A or B. It's more influential how we set that up, how we prepare for it, how we consult, and all those sorts of things. And so it's dangerous when we say, well, listen, I'm not the one pulling the lever, so this isn't my problem. It's not my choice. I'm not going to worry about it. Shared responsibility is really taking seriously those other roles that go into any decision.
Mm-hmm. It is. Does canon law, by the way, as I remember, there's some advice in canon law when one shares one's opinions or thoughts or concerns with the shepherds of the church, priests, bishop. There's a way to do it. There's an art of not just listening. There's an art of speaking. There's an art of how. So can you say something about that?
Yeah. Now, I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think it's right around Canon 212 is where it talks about that, right? Within 3 or 4 canons, probably. And one thing is it says, we're to express our insights, we're to express our opinion according to our knowledge. So according to our expertise, like, just because I read a blog about it one time does not make me an expert on a particular topic. So that's a part of it. And to communicate our opinion, our desires, those things, respecting the dignity of those we're communicating with, so not in a capricious way, not in a, I think in a real sense, at times you see communication that's in a violent way, and in a way that's not it's communicated to the person who actually needs to hear it. So the right audience, the right content, things that you actually have a good sense of, the right audience, the right content, and communicating it in the right way, in a respectful way, in a way that honors the other person's dignity as well. So, yeah.
That makes so much sense. We've talked about this before. Like there's such richness in canon law's vision of the way that the body of Christ in her institutional form is to be organized in a way that's harmonious with her mission and her nature. I don't know if canon law talks about the canon law as really determining the ordo caritatis, the order of charity, the orderly way that love is to be lived out. Law, we usually think of law as just kind of restrictive or punitive or adversarial, right? But it has a much more constructive goal, which is what you've been getting at here, to help us. So I guess all that to say, would you like to see, and maybe this is a question that's already obvious, would you like to see more teaching to Catholics, to children growing up and young adults and et cetera, about the church's canonical law and their rights and how all that functions so they understand the church? What would you say about, what would you like to see happen more?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great question. And one of the dynamics that I experienced in school is you read the code and you read, articles from canonists and stuff, and you see a real richness in the way the church is organized and the way the church understands herself and the structures she's put in place. But then also you see the tension of we struggle to live it out. We're a human organization and we struggle with all sorts of challenges, the same challenges that exist outside of the church, we experience in the life of the church. And there is that tension between, the ideal that is proclaimed and then how do we actually live that out in the real world. I think, more than just teaching about canon law and awareness, yeah, definitely. I think people should have that. And I think that it's good and it's enriching. I think it's a challenge for us in the life of parishes, and it's a challenge for us in the life of a diocese to say, how do we really put these principles in action? How do we live this out? I think, and I mentioned this in my thesis, I've most of my career has been on the diocesan side, working in diocesan offices for about 15 years. And when we struggle with this, I think we often struggle with this just because the sheer amount of administrative responsibilities that are carried. We have so many things going on. It's really hard to put these things in practice. And I think it can be done. Obviously, I think it could be done. That's why I do the work that I do. But the real kind of grind work of how do we do that well, trying to improve our processes, trying to improve our engagements with the people in the diocese. It's always going to be a work in progress, but I think that there's a lot of work to be done there.
Yeah, that's actually a very helpful way to flip that. I want to talk about the church as what you call in your thesis a mirror of justice, which I think is a really very beautiful image. And you say, I say if dioceses embrace stronger procedural protections like transparency, the ability to respond to evidence, representation by counsel, how can that strengthen the church's credibility and witness? So how does that show the church as a credible organization, as a credible community that takes seriously the rights of the people? And so just maybe thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I think, and I think it was a synod of bishops somewhere in the 70s where they talked about this. Maybe it was 1976. They said, if the church is going to speak about justice to others, she has to be just in their eyes, And I think that that's just true. And I think that, and some of this, the work of Charles Taylor has kind of convinced me of this. The short book, Ethics of Authenticity, where he talks about authenticity is a principal good in our culture today. Like, we really look to that. We really revere that. And without integrity in the way that we act, I don't think that we're credible. So if we're going to proclaim these truths, and we proclaim them because they're true, we proclaim them because we believe them. But if we're going to proclaim the profound dignity of every person, if we're going to proclaim the preferential option for the poor, if we're going to say these things, we just have to live it. We have to live it, because without that, we aren't credible. And none of us do it perfectly. I don't do it perfectly, but this is the invitation that's put before us. And I think that's worth striving towards.
Yeah, that's profound. It's profound to think of the church as a model of justice and all that involves is essential part of her witness, and that canon law provides the framework in which that claim can be manifested, because these are the demands we say apply to us and how we approach the issues of justice. And I know you gave, we had a fun conversation about how you gave a presentation to a group of lawyers about why canon law is so important. And they were so convinced, they were in line afterwards, I know, to talk to you about where they could read more. Is that right?
Yeah, that's close,
So tell me where you think there are misconceptions, I guess, in this disconnect, where people outside think, oh, the church has a law. Well, does that really mean anything? Isn't civil law the only thing that really means anything at all? Isn't secular kind of law? I love your reflections on that.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the church's legal system, and this is, one of the classes that we took, we talked about the question, is church law really law? Like, what does it mean to call canon law? And one of the elements is, pretty integral to any legal system is the idea of coercion, that law can coerce certain behaviors. Well, the church's law, there are threads of coercion and elements, but the church's law, we don't think of it as coercive, right? And most of the coercive tools that most legal systems would use, the church doesn't use, right? So what one canonist would talk about, he would say, well, this is a community that always involves a voluntary association. You voluntarily associate with it, but once you do, it places demands on you. So it's voluntary, but then it requires things of you. And I guess, how do we live that out well? This maybe isn't really answering the question. I don't know how to convince civil lawyers that canon law
to take seriously. Right.
Yeah, it should be taken seriously. I believe that it should, because I believe, maybe it's because I believe the gospel places demands on us, but those demands are for our flourishing, and therefore our freedom. And any community of persons has to be ordered, not as a way that takes away my freedom, but it has to be ordered so that I can be free, so that I can flourish. And, just because canon law doesn't have a mechanism to impose its will, it doesn't mean that ordering is not good for me or unnecessary to me thriving.
That makes sense. It's interesting, by the way, and this is July 2nd when we're recording this, and notoriously in the news today, this is public enough, I think, that people even outside the church bubble would hear about the Society of St. Pius X's consecration of 4 new bishops against the express request of Pope Leo to not do it, with a threat of schism. So that would be an example of a coercive or punitive measure being imposed. So just to throw that into a contemporary context here at the end, how would that fit into this, I guess, this vision of canonical structure of the church and its purpose, and why penalties like this, or how they function with their purposes?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, I think that's a really good example for this kind of nuance that I'm trying to speak to, because excommunication is a medicinal penalty. It's a penalty that is imposed, or in this case declared, for the sake of those who have incurred it, because it's saying you have separated yourself from the body of Christ. And out of love for you, we want to restore communion. So it's letting people know where they objectively stand. All of us can do things that separate us from the body of Christ. And when we do those things, the most merciful response is to tell us, you've separated yourself from communion, please come home. So the declaration of the penalty is, in my mind, the declaration of the penalty is less of a punishment, and it's more of an invitation to come home, a recognition that they've left and an invitation to come home.
That's excellent. That's a perfect way to actually to end it. It's a tragic situation, but that's the context of maybe that mercy is at the heart of the law, that there's always this desire for, as you said, for reconciliation. And all of the church's canon law and this right to be heard, all of these are ordered towards the ultimate unity of all in Christ's body, where we're bound together by charity, and that the law is the framework that protects and guards that charity or that unity. So
yeah, a tool that helps that charity flourish. It's a means to an end, and the end is that communion with each other, the intimacy with Christ.
So just as an ending comment, your studies in canon law, which was heroic, by the way, what you did with your family, the sacrifices you made to make that happen over a long period of time. What would you say, out of that whole process, Adam, that you found the most enriching in that whole learning process you went through? What did you take away that you're most grateful for?
Oh, man. Well, I think seeing how the code is rooted in the Second Vatican Council and how it really has done a tremendous job of embodying the teachings that the Second Vatican Council gave us, I think that was something I hadn't known before. And it was really beautiful to kind of, just see it in the canons themselves.
Mm-hmm. It is. I remember when I studied it years ago, I was stunned at really how beautiful the language of the law itself was. Even the sections on marriage were very, very beautiful. So I would share that. I didn't study it like you did, but I love to hear that. Well, Again, so grateful for you being here, for sharing your insights on this. I've never had a conversation about canon law before outside of, private conversations. So this is really, I've enjoyed this immensely, and it's a chance for us to actually catch up, because I've known Adam for years and we don't get to catch up too much.
Yeah, I have too. And, if your podcast is around a week from now, which is unlikely, but if it is, I'd love to be back. Yeah.
Well, and what I'll do is I'll let you know if the views exceed 4. And if they do, then it's beat your thesis.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to make it. Yeah, I'm going to make it.
And actually, Derek, our producer, can let me know if people make it past the first 30 seconds of the video, if that's when they usually all stop. So
yeah, he's asleep right now, isn't he?
It's okay. I can reach the button over here myself, so I can turn it off.
Okay.
Yeah, he's exhausted. It's not your fault, really. And by the way, what is your real name? I know Adam Storey is your witness protection. Can you tell us, or is that not?
Oh, I can't possibly tell you that. Yeah, no.
Okay, man. Okay, that's
Someday.
Unfortunate. Someday.
Yeah.
Someday. Okay. Well, always a pleasure. Please tell your wife I said hello, and God bless you, brother.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you. Well, this has been another edition of Sharing the Faith, which is a production of the Diocese of Pensacola-Tallahassee. I'll be back again in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, may God bless you, and thank you for watching today.
Thank you for tuning in today to the Sharing the Faith podcast. If you would like to learn more about the podcast, visit ptdiocese.org/sharingthefaith. If you listen to the audio version through an app such as Apple Podcast, Spotify, or iHeartRadio, be sure to rate, review, and comment. If you watched on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe, or leave a comment on the episode. Thank you for listening.